Oh, now it's live. It says the meeting is now streaming live on YouTube, so I think it's working.
Yeah, you are live. You can see just you.
It's just me. How comes?
I don't know.
Very good.
Don't to speak.
No, apparently it's I'm the one that is in the live stream. But I guess Claudia is gonna pop up now too. Oh yeah.
Hello.
Shall we? Do we want to do it through yours?
Maybe yes. No, chiudi il tuo microfono. Chiudi anche il microfono. Quello lei devi chiudere questo e il microfono. Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Live stream, which is a little bit delayed. I guess
Okay,
you have to
cool.
close.
Hello, good morning. Yes.
Or maybe you want to keep the connection.
Let's see how it goes. I hope this goes smoothly.
Hi, nice to see everybody.
Well, maybe we should try to see everybody first.
Yeah. First, I have the list of the 6 students that have received the exercise, and then I guess there will be other students that will join in auditing. So today we wanted to start with a little introduction, and we have prepared a presentation, but in reality I wanted first to start work with the 6 students that are enrolled in the workflow, and to them we send a first exercise to do. So I wanted to start to talk to them, for them to start to introduce and see what they start producing. And then the other student, if they have a question, they can intervene and ask. So see what they start producing. And then the other student, if
I think you have to close that window.
is closed, I don't know where it is. Yes, okay. There was an echo. I think we have some problem with the live streaming. So the tutor team is myself with Marco Poletto, which is the director of Ecology Studio, Irini that work with us in Ecology Studio, and Emiliano and Elena that are with us in Innsbruck. Myself, maybe you know me already, I'm a co-founder of Ecology Studio with Marco Poletto, as well as professor at Innsbruck University and the director of the Urban Morphogenesis Lab at the Bartlett. The workshop today is quite experimental. It's about a technique or a mode of working that we have started developing more or less 1 year ago, working with UNDP. And it's about connecting biological computing to artificial intelligence to be applied to the redesign of what we call the urban sphere. So the infrastructure that connect global city and that is at the moment in conflict with the natural biosphere. So the students that are enrolled, if they want to introduce themselves before, Marco, do you want to add something?
No, it's fine. I think that, yeah, later on we will try to go a little bit more in depth with the sort of workflow that we have developed in the last few years, but also with the kind of agenda that is underpinning it. I think there is a great deal of innovation happening these days, but for us, the question still remains, what is all this, let's say, technological innovation good for? And in other words, we have a quite strong, I would say, environmental agenda that it's really about the current preoccupation with the way our society at large can coexist with the natural ecosystems in the biosphere. And of course, since cities are now, let's say, predominantly the environment which we inhabit. And even if we are not living in urban centers, we are still part of this large network that eventually supplies information, matter, and energy to our urban systems. So we are part of it. And in that sense, it's important to begin to understand how we can work creatively as designers with this kind of a complex system. So in other words, the key is we live in an age that has been called Anthropocene, but maybe one of the interesting aspects of the Anthropocene is that maybe perhaps even contradicts the name of Anthropocene. We are no longer, let's say, in full control of the systems that we have created. So it's an epoch in which man, the anthros, rather than being at the center of it, is more and more enmeshed in a much more complex sets of systems which have their own intelligence, they have their own agency. And these are, in some cases, of course, digital, technological, other cases biological, as we have seen with this pandemic. So the interest is how can we begin to develop design strategies, design techniques that, if not, where we are not fully in charge in a way, and therefore our creativity becomes more like a conversation with other forms of intelligence. And in that sense, it doesn't mean that we give up on our role as designers, but perhaps the way we design, the way we understand being designer is actually also evolving and shifting as a consequence. So there is in our let's say approach, I think a strong interest in, of course, deploying this technique in a way that is useful to the design process, but also, using these techniques and these experiments as a way of reflecting upon our role, our position as designers in this specific moment in time. And so that's where we want to try to locate the workshop. Like Claudia is saying, we are trying to supply you with some techniques to begin with, so that we can get experimenting straight away. But at the same time, we would like to use these few days to also discuss and comment, about the relevance and the potentials of these new approaches, and also eventually see how each one of you essentially understands or reads this type of potential, which we expect to be, let's say, rather different depending on your own background and your specific context. So so I think we should just follow up with what Claudia is saying. It would be good to just give the words to you, so we don't start in the sort of a traditional way with us talking forever and you basically getting bored. And then once we get a few things happening on your side, then we can come in with some new input, with some fresh input from let's say our experience as academics and designers, and so we can share it with you.
Okay, perfect. Maybe Adam Bleney, if you want to introduce yourself and what you started to do, we go one by one with the students that are part of the course. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks for having me. So my background is in architecture. I finished my BArch in 2012. I went into work but didn't like it, so I've recently just completed my PhD. And I've just started as a lecturer in responsive architecture up at Lancaster's new School of Architecture. So I'm really interested in material computation on really granular levels. So how can you make living architectural ecosystems that are scalable by guiding self-assembly? And the thesis explored that through creating tunable environments. So I'm interested in how digital design tools can guide self-assembling materials, so structures can tune and adapt their properties on the fly. So I'm interested to see how sort of genetic algorithms can sort of learn from that, or like how interrelationships can develop across scales or properties on the fly. Do you want to see some samples from the...
It will be good also to see, I know there was a first exercise that we asked you to do where we wanted to see where you are with that, and if you can share the screen, you should be able to do that now.
Yeah, 2 seconds. Where is... I don't know why. Oh. Can you see that? So I'm interested in, so Manchester is where I live. So I sort of selected some areas and highlighted those. So at the minute, Manchester's got really bad air pollution. So I was interested in sort of how you could...
in general, as a comment for tomorrow, I think for visibility as well, if rather than having the InDesign and preparing a board, you have a presentation where we can see, because of the medium where we are, one image at a time, and then it's easier to recognize the pattern and visualize what you've been doing. But this is just a suggestion for tomorrow to visualize better. Anyway, please go on. We are in Manchester.
Yeah, so I was interested in sort of getting rid of or re-greening or creating green infrastructure around sort of car-based transports, and how that can sort of then fold into the sort of the canal networks within Manchester. So then I zoomed in on a few sites, and I used, we started to incorporate the slime mold as the way to sort of merge the images in a little microsite that was selected, and then just ran through the process of incorporating that.
Is this a slime mold you're being cultivating yourself, or is this an image you use from database?
This was just from a database. It'd be really interesting though to carry out, if you picked certain nodes within Manchester, to then run a physical slime mold simulation and then see how that incorporated into that as well.
Can you show a bit better the sample image that you've been selecting and what are the results?
So this was sort of the early cycles of it. In the middle one is the merge, the one where my mouse is over is where they are merging the images. And then it just sort of starts to resemble a networked kind of structure. They're quite low resolution at this point though, so in terms of scaling them up for clarity, does it matter that they'll be quite pixelated and then sort of out of context in some regards?
Have you...
Or do we want?
Have you reached already the last epoch in your simulation, and were you able to reassemble the image together?
I haven't reassembled yet, no.
Okay, so that's maybe one thing to try to do next and see what the outcome is.
Yeah, okay.
Essentially, right now, the two original images that you are using are a satellite image, which is like true color, right? It's not the one that you have mapped onto, right? It's the true color one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then you are using this, let's say, slime mold picture. Do you have these two images that you started from? So that we can also understand, for instance, the resolution and the kind of granularity of them.
Yeah. So that is the slime mold resolution.
Sorry, I'm still seeing your presentation.
Sorry, right, okay. Let me... Hang on. Is that up now?
Okay, yes. Now I can see it.
Yeah. So again, it's just a image taken, or yeah. So it has no relevance to Manchester in terms of its sort of network structure.
Sure. No, I understand. It's a kind of generic network morphology, but
Yeah.
you know, in a way, it already has some interesting element because let's say, although the morphology itself is not specifically developed on the structure of Manchester, the let's say characteristics of this type of network, which is the kind of a network the slime mold creates in the plasmodium phase, are still very visible. No, so here, for instance, you have for instance, in the center of the image, you can see this typical front when the slime mold actually grows out and scans the environment. So is essentially trying to, you know, colonize new areas of the space and see if there are let's say nutrients in that area. And then you can see how that is fed by the kind of thicker network in the channel, no, that eventually terminates into this area of progress. So you have, let's say, all these kind of you know, fractal dimensions, I would say, that are typical of the slime mold. You know, this this ability to create this very convoluted and fuzzy, if you want, front. And this, for instance, is one aspect that in itself already has some quite interesting repercussion when you try to project it or imagine it as a kind of logic for urban design. No? So for translate it into the scale of so from the micro scale of the slime mold to a macro scale of the site. Obviously, as you know, some of the characteristics of such a small organisms are not scalable literally, but at the same time there are morphological characteristics that are scalable. And so one of the classical examples is precisely this problem of the interface between the infrastructure with, let's say, the space. Now, normally infrastructure are either linear or network descriptions, and therefore they don't describe or define a space or enclose the space. No, well, on the other hand, most urban spaces are defined through lines or boundaries, no, that actually enclose them. And this is one of the classical issues, no, when you begin to think about, you were talking about the problem of pollution, no, which is clearly something that is on one side infrastructural because it's related to you know, key infrastructures, but on the other hand, it is really pervasive and it distributes in space as a gradient like, and in that sense has a very strong spatial dimension to it. How do you interface, let's say, these two sides of the same coin in a way? Well, the slime mold is a good metaphor for that. And it's not just a metaphor, but it's also an operational tool. So I think in that sense, for me, the interest of this first experiment you're doing would be to see how the gun, for instance, which is very good at capturing these particular features, no? Like, for instance, the boundary condition, the areas where, you know, there is a change of state. In this case, it could be from the dark brown to the yellow, but also very much where the network becomes surface or the network becomes boundary. No? How the gun picks up these little qualities and translates them into a kind of, you know, or sort of materialize them through the material of the satellite image in this case, which is the other data set that you're providing. So in that sense, we are kind of really harvesting the intelligence of the slime mold on one side to you know, show us how we may be able to manipulate networks and the morphologies as part of the same system. And on the other hand, we are picking the brain of the gun to help us imagining how this could be translated in the matter of the city, if you want, no? Or you know, and I think that's where I think this first experiment you're doing could be very interesting, even if, for instance, you don't have yet, let's say, a slime mold diagram that has specific anchoring point or reference point to the city. But in that sense, maybe it's interesting to see also the other image of the city, to understand what scale you are thinking to work with.
So it's that scale.
I think, Mark, it's okay. I think you should. Yeah, you need to switch. So basically, I think you should also consider more in detail which feature of the city you are interested in, both morphologically than in terms of behavior, and which feature of the slime mold you are interested in. So which flow, in that sense, I know that the slime mold you use is part of the work from my previous student, so I know the reference, but and not because it's my reference, but in general it's good when you take an image that comes from a book or from online search. It's good to have a reference to it, not only for academic terms, but also because the reference allows you to contextualize it. So that image is being produced for a specific reason and to look a specific feature of the slime mold in that case. And the same happens for the city. I think, for example, the slime mold is, as an algorithm, usually considered for the distribution of resources, so for network. And Marco was talking about the multiple resolution of this network. So maybe this is a feature you're interested in for which characteristic of Manchester. So if you want to translate that feature, then, and want it to work as a model, then to be not only a morphological, but a morphogenetic translation, then you need to be more precise in what effectively you are translating.
So then I was interested in, or then the process of merging a GAN or the images, or that's what it does with the GAN. The slime mold, that is just one final image of its process. Do you know what I mean? That slime mold has grown over time and then settled on that state in that image. So with an urban context, it's obviously in flux all the time. So if you change the conditions in which the physical slime mold was growing, because imagine if it was after new food, if you associated that node of food for the slime mold to a condition in the urban sort of system, then the GAN or the images would change properties as activity changed. You know what I mean?
Well, that is something that you need to experiment once you have more. At the moment, I see still Manchester. I'm not sure which kind of impact at the moment morphologically the slime mold had on your original satellite map. But if you talk about resources, there's something that you need to also evaluate visually once this has been applied.
So then is there a way of keeping certain aspects within the original satellite image? So if you were to take out, if you were to use Photoshop to remove layers or like maintain certain images by deleting it off that file and then run it in the GAN, is that something possible?
It could also be interesting to look for, you were talking about pollution, right? So you could look for a specific description of air pollution. There are, normally air pollution is represented in gradients or gradient field of concentration. Also using, normally they use ISO lines a little bit like you would do with topographies or you know, air pressure, barometric air pressure. And so I think you should be able to find it for Manchester, a kind of description of, let's say, this main line of concentration of the key pollutants, like for instance the NOx's or you know, the carbon monoxide. I think they are available. So one thing that could be interesting is that if you are able to extract one of these gradient fields, you could use that gradient field to, for instance, inform the slime mold itself. So obviously, growing a physical slime mold, it's interesting thing to do, and you can do it, but it will take you longer than 2 or 3 days. You could also use the gun itself to grow the slime mold over a gradient field, for instance, of pollution coming from database on air pollution in Manchester. So that is also another possibility to begin to create 2 parallel gun speculations, if you want. One that is the one you have been running right now, and the other one that actually takes the slime mold image and basically grows it algorithmically on a description of Manchester that is based on the concentrations of pollutants. So it is not, let's say, represented through the physical true color image like we are doing in this one, but is represented through a more abstract density map of pollutants. And this is possible. In fact, maybe we will show something later in the workflow DeepGreen that we have developed. We have a series of ways of extracting information from different type of sources, and then create descriptions that can be also of a different nature, more material, like in the case of true color images, and more abstract, like in the case of the density map or network descriptions. But the interesting thing about the possibility that is offered by the gun is essentially to really allow you to quite quickly speculate, like what if scenarios, when you begin to combine this level of information, and I think this is something quite useful, especially for the kind of creative thinking. I mean, we've been doing this type of experiment for many years now, with different type of tools. From Grasshopper to other things, and in a way there is always this kind of difficulties when you start working very much with data, with number, with environmental monitoring, etc., to move beyond the analytical level. I think what is really great about this is that actually it has like inherent kind of dreamlike quality, speculative quality in itself, but still within a kind of a computational framework. So that's I think what makes quite exciting, the possibility to quickly play with this type of algorithms, while at the same time gathering more specific data sets about the type of parameters that you are interested in. But let's try to bring together the image as quick as you can, because I think, again, it would be very interesting to speculate not on this original image, but on whatever came out of your first run. I'm sure there will be some, even if it's not so completely successful, I'm sure there will be some interesting feature that we can pick on that will actually let us move a step further. Maybe even if you go back to your tiles, before you were showing some of the tiles in the epochs, and maybe even in there you can already begin to see interesting things happening. I don't know how many epochs you have done there, but you can see already that there are some interesting interpretations, of, for instance, the park or some of the green areas you had in your original satellite image that have been kind of reimagined on the morphology of the slime mold. I'm sure there will be something quite interesting coming out, and also there may be already in that image a different. You see, there are the moments in which the cycle gun is picking up on the searching front of the slime mold versus when it's picking up on the network part of the slime mold, it actually detects two different elements of the satellite image. And I think what is kind of fun about the gun is really how it sort of make these kind of associations, which yeah, I mean, sometimes are quite surreal, but on the other hand, they are very stimulating in terms of you know, our understanding of this intersection between infrastructure and let's say the kind of biological substratum of the city.
Cool, thank you. So shall we? Shall we see Corbinian as a second one? We will see you one at a time, the 6 one that were with us. Then we see whether it's still some time for the presentation today or whether we have a conversation more about the result. Do somebody's got question about this, both of the participating and the auditing student? If there is some question, we can answer. Okay. If somebody has got question, can unmute himself. Otherwise, Corbino, if you want to share the screen and also introduce yourself.
Okay, just a second.
He's muted. No,
Corbinian, we cannot hear you.
You cannot hear me?
No, now I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, I was just not saying anything.
Okay,
So,
I had the impression you were talking, but yeah.
okay, so I'm Corbinian. I'm a master's student of Claudia in Innsbruck at the Synthetic Lab Studio. And I've been dealing a lot with redistribution systems. So I was analyzing Kathmandu as my location. And then I was analyzing different parts, the natural networks and human networks and how they can interact with each other. And as a main point, I was dealing with the water because both systems are striving to water. And my result was that the interacting parts are the areas where there is agriculture. And these are the interesting parts where the urban sprawl is taking place right now and where I want to react to the sprawl of the city. So this is the site, and I was doing some flow line analysis to as an idea of how I can apply some patterns and structures to the landscape that I can use for the gun. And this was my first experiment of the cycle gun. I used the left one as as an eroded topography from Houdini. And I used exactly the same frame from the satellite image of Kathmandu and used it as my second input. And this was my result that I got out at the end. For the first try, I didn't take any screenshots of the progress. I did this for the second one. But I got some really patchy areas where I got these edges in there where I'm not quite sure why it did that. But when you zoom in, there's some really interesting areas where the land distribution is following the erosion of the topography. And this is another zoom in but there you can see really good how it's kind of patching it together where it didn't quite know what to do. I also used like the 200 epochs from the default value. And as a next try, I was taking a picture I took from the mountain where there was like a water pond kind of, and there was like these water plants growing in there. And I kind of like the structures, how they connect with each other and spread out over the lake. And this is my second try of how I want to apply the cycle gun to the topography and just experiment what comes out. I'm not quite sure yet. I trained it and took some screenshots. And there's quite some interesting results how it looks like the roots of the water flowers are now building the streets, and the houses are made out of flowers, kind of. Okay, yeah, that's where I'm right now. I didn't put it together to a complete image yet, this one, but the training data is ready for now.
Hey, thank you, Corbin. I think it's yeah, it's really great to see the work you've done so far. I mean, one thing that comes to my mind, and then maybe also we can hear some of the impressions from Irini and the other guys who've been playing around with this a lot, is that the resolution of some of your images, it's really high, or let's say, in other words, you are you took, especially in the first experiment, you took a really huge chunk of territory, and there is a fineness to the image that is in a way beautiful to see, but on the other hand, I think it's very hard for the gun to capture, because the resolution that we basically can afford at the moment with the gun, it's not that high. I'm not sure what resolution you were running at the moment, but I'm sure that it was no way near the resolution of your, let's say, generative drawings, the one you have done before. So let's say my suggestion in that sense would be to try and like you already did in a way with the second attempt, but maybe you could do it also with the first, to kind of zoom in on a portion of your case study city, where essentially, you know, features of the landscape and also of your, let's say, simulated flow or erosional topography become recognizable very clearly at the resolution that you are able to let's say input in as a data set for the cycle gun. Because otherwise, if the gun it cannot recognize let's say significant features, then it will be impossible for it to effectively do a good job at sort of you know, generating new images which are let's say modeled around those features. So right now I suspect that it's almost like every pixel of the image is a feature, but that, you know, so then there is no, let's say, macro feature that is containing at least a bunch of pixels which can be recognized because of the resolution. So I think that that goes for both the satellite and for your, let's say, biological model, whether it's flowers or whether it's a eroded landscape. It doesn't matter. I think what matters is that the two are you know, are at the scale where those macro features become recognizable.
Mm-hmm. But
From
the two
your
have to
eyes
be
and,
at the should the two be at the same scale, so the outcome is going to be a reasonable outcome?
well, I mean, in the case of in the first example where you have already a simulation that is matching the scale of the territory, then yeah, of course, it's great to keep the matching thing. But you know, like, but I think that you may want to zoom in and, you know, more than zoom in, you know, just to take a portion of the landscape and of the eroded topography, that, you know, where the features can become much more clearly recognizable. No? Because that's what the gun is good at. It's actually good at recognizing macro features, and then, you know, basically get to transpose them, let's say, from one data set to the other one. I'm also not so sure about the resolution of your satellite image. obviously here we see a very, very far away images, like I don't know how many kilometers this frame is, but it looks like quite a lot.
It's like 15 by 15 kilometers.
Yeah. So I would do a test in which you select a portion of these, maybe an area that you find particularly interesting, where you know, in terms of you know, water systems, or in terms of the way the city has manipulated a water system, and you know, and zoom in as much as you can until basically you get the limit of the satellite image. I don't know, on Kathmandu, I don't know how good is the resolution of the satellite there, but I'm sure you can zoom in quite a bit before you reach the limit of the pixels. And I think that you should try to do an experiment with that, because yeah, then you will get a sense of yeah, how good is this kind of combination of data sets in changing the city morphology as it is now. So yeah, I think definitely keep the correspondence between the two, but I would try to zoom in a specific area until you reach the limit of the satellite.
Okay. For the second one, I zoomed in like the double amount. Like in this one, it's the same image, just twice the zoom, but probably I should go more in, even more than that.
Probably even more than that.
Yeah, I will try to do micro urban scale, so a little bit more than that. So that we are sure that the resolution of the satellite is comparable with the resolution of the other image, so you can obtain a sharper result, and also we can have detail that in the image rather than the fuzzy line that you have now. Another question, I do like the image of the flower, but I thought that maybe in terms of process, it will be on one side interesting to understand why you choose a specific erosion map digitally, and then physically, well, I have an advantage here because I know that you have some beautiful photo of erosion pattern of sand. Maybe those one would be more appropriate if they are higher resolution enough in terms of pattern. Why did you choose this specific image?
The sand image is kind of hard to deal with, I think, because there's like, when you zoom in, you have all the sand grains, and then it's like really black and white. Like when you really zoom in, you have one pixel really black and the next pixel really white. And for example, the water flowers here, they all have a connection in between each other, and it's not these super sharp edges like it is for the sand. I thought it might be better to use this one for the cycle gun than the sand patterns.
I'm just personally, I'm just a bit worried about the flowery part, but you know, it's more like a personal opinion. I think that it becomes quite quickly, you know, iconic in a weird way. And like you said, you start having everything looking like flowers, which is maybe not necessarily what your let's say project is about. But you know, again, we can also you know, again, we are here to try, you know, so I'm not going to be the one who said yeah, don't do it. But yeah, I think in a way the you know, the original, like the first image you use, the first attempt, for me it's really good. You could try using that again in a more zoomed in way. Then if you want to you know, then when you see the result of this one, if there are elements of this that we like, we can obviously borrow that too.
Of course, in the project there is this question of the water tower, and the flower could relate to that, to this iconic element. But in terms of the workshop that we are doing here, I think the flower is a good start. But then if you use the flower, you should have a catalog of conditions that are similar to test and compare, right? because the project was about erosion, then if we have the flower and we want to try to have this more iconic emergent element, maybe we should compare with other to understand how we tune these characteristics, no? So you have a water landscape, and in Kathmandu there are these water towers. So the flower could help creating this, you know, smooth versus striated landscape. So a landscape that is more distributed with some iconic element. But then, which other image could you use to experiment? I mean, this is, well, I think it's something good to do during the workshop, is experimental. But we need to try to understand also how to frame it in terms of research, I think. You have one comment, yeah.
Well, yeah, I agree, definitely.
Cool. Somebody made a comment.
Yeah, best, which actually basically is almost reading my mind, I think. No, this comment is,
Okay.
I think, is exactly what I thought.
What is she saying? Can you read it for everybody?
I really like your approach, Corbinian. I would like to see all the buildings as flowers in the macro future, but the fact that the flowers are not enough abstract has slightly reduced the strength of your approach in my mind. And then I would add great work anyway. Okay, cool. I think it's a good idea if you guys comment here. We can read some of the comment also if you know, if you wish, so we can make it a little more interactive. It's not just like one-to-one, but like it's everyone drops in some of their feelings about the project they see. It's a good. All right. So
Thanks,
shall we?
Corbinian? Maybe we
Thank
can
you.
see the next student, Paula. If you want to introduce yourself as well as.
Hello. Hi, my name is Paula. I am from Barcelona, and I recently graduated from Masters in Architecture in FIU in Florida. And let me know if you guys can see my screen.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the site that I have chosen. And this is kind of like analyzing the aspects that I'm interested in exploring further, which are basically these really hard edges that the city has towards the water when it's essentially one of the cities that is most impacted by sea level rise. And also this green is, sorry, I think you guys can see that. So yeah, the green is showing areas where seagrass is currently growing and thriving, and seagrass combined with other species such as mangroves and ecosystems is something that cleans the water and is very good for coral restoration and coral reef growth. So this is a zoomed in part of the site. This is South Point Park, and this is one of the images that I have input. And then I was looking at microscopic images of coral itself, and I have chosen this one also for the input of my first run, which this is like my first time using CycleGAN, but thanks to Irini, I was able to run it once. And this is like some documentation through the epochs. And I think it's quite interesting how it's kind of like working with, in some of these vignettes, it's working at a very smaller grain. And it kind of reminds me of the texture itself of the coral, the limestone. This was my first result. I think it's interesting. It gives me the idea of what if these hard edges are kind of like softened and broken down by the coral growth itself, right? So as the sea level is rising, this image makes me think like, what if we created such condition in the water that coral can thrive enough to kind of take over the city and also be occupied by humans, you know, but kind of breaking that edge and softening and bringing that ecosystem into the land. I know it sounds a little crazy, but that's what I read from this, and I'm open to further exploration. So this is what I have for now.
Yeah, this is a quite intriguing image already. I think as a first attempt is quite impressive. Maybe we need to congratulate you and also Irene, I suppose. But you know, I guess for normally it takes a lot longer to get some interesting you know, attempts like this. But yeah, definitely, I think the topic that you brought up, it's seems to be very clear. So that also, I suppose, helped you because you had a quite clear idea what you were looking at. What I like particularly of this image is also the way the part on the top, you know, which is the underwater part, seems to be actually working. Like normally these parts that are more homogeneous, they tend to be quite kind of fuzzy, and they tend to kind of lose resolution, and that happens a little bit on the top right corner. But on the top left instead, it really gives this beautiful idea of a kind of a landscape that continues under the water, right? And
Yeah.
that has this kind of a so that is not just concerned with what happens above the water, but also that really imagines a kind of continuous morphology. That I think it's basically what you are referring at when you talk about you know, breaking this paradigm of the hard edge. I think is not just to complexify the shape of the edge, but really to begin to understand the edge as a sort of a three-dimensional morphological condition that goes you know, from above and below the water, especially if we consider that level of the water as something that changes not just, you know, for tidal movements, but also let's say as a kind of future projection, no? So this is intriguing. I also like this kind of bottom right corner where you see this kind of well, we should call it lake or something, or like basins, which sort of look like kind of a semi-enclosed pools, which, you know, you can also imagine them to be kind of floated and dried in different times of the year. And so, I mean, there are very interesting ways in which the water is already kind of colonizing this landscape. I think that's one of the key elements of it. The reference image that you used, I wasn't quite sure what it was.
This one?
Yes, exactly.
It is a coral species, yeah.
Is it a picture of a coral or is it a painting of a coral?
It's a picture.
Okay.
I zoomed in, yeah.
How much zoom?
How much?
Yeah, which kind of, is it a macro photo or what is it?
Because the image that I found was already pretty zoomed in, and I zoomed in further, so I really wouldn't know up to what.
Yeah, I found it interesting to maybe also understand a bit more about that. If you can.
Yeah, exactly. I think one question would be definitely the result is very beautiful, and definitely the result is beautiful. But I think one way to evolve it, which I don't know if we can do during this workshop, but one way to evolve it is to be much more specific about the input. So what are the corals that you are inputting? What is the source? And eventually at some point, if you go on with the project, I think one way of creating a tighter relationship there is also to start and look at your own coral or sample of coral, either with a microscope or with a camera, and understand how a specific morphology and morphogenetic process can have an influence on the larger scale. Because at the moment, I think the image is very powerful, and we can start to speculate what this could entail in terms of architectural exploration. But in order to create deeper correlation, I think we need to know more about what the input are, where do they come from, and at which kind of scale do they operate. And eventually we can then consider also to use, you know, a sequence of them, you know, at different scale. So you can train the image once with one, and then you can retrain it to obtain variation related to that scale and the process that act at that scale. I think that will be an interesting evolution of
Thank you. And
Yeah,
I had a
then-
question.
Yeah.
Sorry. Why, if I put this input, the result is showing me, it seems like it's only reading this area. And it's curious because the screenshots that I have taken of the progress, it is showing how it's working, this snake condition and parts of this site, although the final, it's just focusing on even more zoomed in of my image.
Maybe Irene, do you want to comment on this as well?
Yes, I think that if we can test it in a previous epoch also, you can see the other part also. I think this is because the overfitting. So your image is keep mapped to one to other. So if you go to the input, the biological input image, you see the differences of the brightness and the colors that, for example, the deeper colors are on the top of the photo. So that's why it's selected after a lot of training to go the part of the sea, let's say, all up, and go all the other part of the city down. So we can also test now, as long as you have the training, in the epoch that you saw the morphology of the upper part of the city. So we can see also the result for that.
Yeah, that is also part of the work on the, I think, on the input image and the biological part, because if there are no correlation between the input image and the satellite image, then you can have a very beautiful result or very impactful result, but it doesn't retain much of the original image apart from the color distribution and some prototypical distribution. But if you manage to work on the biological reference, and we did, for example, with slime mold and other, in a way that you start to create correlation between your biological reference, or to effectively work with the biological element in terms of biocomputation, and relate it also to your site, then there will be higher level of correlation, and you manage to have an integration between the input image and what exists at the moment, which is probably more sophisticated than what you have now, which is like a very fast forward image, we could imagine, because completely transform what is there.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, but I guess it's good to start from this, you know, highly speculative layer, and then, you know, what I was trying to do was to kind of extrapolate some moments of it that, yeah, I found particularly intriguing, and then see if we can, let's say, evolve those moments or kind of make them even more clear and sharp. But I think definitely the suggestion to look at not just the final epoch, but also some of the intermediates, it's very good, because in any case, this is a process, obviously, and I think it's intriguing also to see, you know, how is this a process in fact evolving. So how does the algorithm get there? What are the sort of intermediate steps it goes through? And what kind of a result this gives us. So that's, I think, is worth spending a little bit of time looking at that. You could also, you know, since we are in the very early exploratory stage, you could also take another sample of the one that you have, for instance, the brainy coral on the right. I found it quite beautiful as an image, and it could be, obviously that will give a completely different result, because that will drive the morphology of your imaginary city into this kind of organization. But again, it's quite intriguing, because obviously brain corals, their morphology is the product of a morphogenetic process, which is really about maximizing surface contact. So essentially the way they evolved like that is because they are trying to maximize the contacts, the surface contacts of exchange with the nutrients in the water and with the radiation of the sun per given volume. So in a way, they are themselves a model of how you would or you could essentially redescribe wet edges of a city or coastal cities to kind of maximize this level of exchange, and also maximize the surface upon which ecosystems of different nature may be able to strive. And also you get an edge that is much more resilient, which is a little bit what you were trying to explain. So I think, at the moment, I think it's worth doing these a couple of more experiments to what we could call a kind of a imaginary model coastline city, if you want, which obviously bears a little resemblance to your site, your original site, because the morphology is driven by these kind of sample images that you have found that have nothing to do with the site in terms of actual morphology, but they have to do with the site in terms of the topic, of course, but also really as a kind of model of soft and convoluted edge, which is in itself interesting. Then maybe like tomorrow we could or the day after, we could begin to see how we may be able to, like Claudia was suggesting, generate images of these data sets where these logics are organized, on top of your site. So in a morphology that is more similar to the site, or maybe in an even more simple way, we may be able to choose a portion of the site that you think you can take as a sample for transformation project, and essentially run the algorithm there, and then maybe work around the edges to build it into the original satellite, and then get something that looks more like a proposal or a feasible proposal. I think that's something that we could probably do in the next couple of days.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
So, next one is Lasse.
Hi. Right. Let me share my screen.
You want to introduce yourself and what you've been doing?
Yeah. I'm Lasse. I finished my bachelor in architecture last year, and I'm now going to start my master in architecture and urbanism at MIT in September. Let me quickly. Can you see my screen?
No, not yet. Yeah, I think we got it now.
So I would say I'm generally interested in logistical landscapes and how to find alternatives to the linearity, because they always, most of the time, connect one point to the other, or like a node in a network, and also to think about a different way or think about their connection between their connection with nature and their context, because most of the time they're quite inward looking. So here I chose a site in Kazakhstan, which is called Korgus, which is the largest dry port in the world, built by China. I have to admit, it wasn't my first choice, actually. I just had a few problems with downloading satellite images and splicing them, so I had to choose one which I already had in high resolution. But so as you can, the interesting part is it's lying exactly at the border between China and Kazakhstan, and there's like those train lines which cross the border, and at the same time a whole city evolved around it with production sites and of course housing for the workers there. So I think those are two parts which I am very interested in. So my biological image is I chose this image, which is an electro microscopic image of biochar, which is a product, a charcoal product, which is usually used to regenerate soils. So to explain my choice, in the beginning I wanted to use a site which is located in an Indonesian forest, and so I thought it could be interesting to use an image of something which could be used to regenerate that site. I wasn't sure, or I'm not completely sure about the structure itself of the image. Maybe there are different, there are better images to use. But so I did initial. This is the product. I did initial tests with the gun. I couldn't get it to completely train, so I stopped at I think epoch 65. But so this is really early on. A bit further, and there you can already see that it's taking up some of the aspects, and I think this was one of the last ones, which was quite interesting. Yes. So that's where I'm at the moment.
Hey, all right, thank you. So you didn't reassemble the image?
No, I didn't have time for that yet.
Okay. So yeah, it would be good if you manage to do it so that we can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
So far, this I guess this let's say biological reference image that you got, it's a kind of really nano scale or micro scale photos, right?
Yes.
So in that sense, for you, this is has a kind of resonance to the project because of the material that is there. But do you see also some kind of correlation between the structure itself and you know the application of it to the scale of the very large scale of the site?
Was it a question?
Yeah. I mean, like, how do you see that? Or if you see it, or what is your thinking, let's say, in that regard?
To be fair, I would say there wasn't that much thinking. It was more about just testing it out, because it was also my first scan, and so.
Yeah, because I mean, for instance, you can already in these a few little examples of tiles you're showing us, for instance, like in the top left one, you know, it has created these sort of craters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what would that mean for you? You know, let's say you're beginning to create a whole new landscape there, right?
Yes.
And how that relates to the current condition of that landscape and its future development.
I think what is interesting is that it's through the biological reference, it separates, or it has there's a harsh separation between those craters and, of course, the rest of the image, which maybe could be understood as pockets of those secondary functions, such as the housing and the production, whereas everything in between could be the actual logistical landscape. So instead of having just a linear connection and then something next to it, it could be much more merged.
Yeah. Right now, there is this really intriguing pattern of flow, no, on one side of the site, whereas on the other side is very much infrastructure driven. Also,
yes.
Your idea is maybe how that could be reimagined into a new form of manufactured landscape, let's say, where the infrastructural component are somehow integrated within the new landscape that emerges out of their operations, right?
Yes, exactly.
There is maybe there is something like that is quite intriguing about that topic. You know, you probably know these photographic projects, you know, from Burtinsky and this portrayal of manufactured landscapes that he has made, where there is always this kind of in my mind at least, you know, there is this latent contradiction between what appears to be in a way very beautiful to our eyes, but at the same time what we know being effectively you know, polluting and destructive to the life and the ecosystems of the site, and in many cases also to the you know, wildlife or communities that live around the sites. And I think that this is definitely one of the key notes of what we were naming before being the urban sphere, like, you know, where basically our society reaches to the biosphere to extract the resources that we need. And cheers. And so in that sense, I think it's a very interesting topic, because it's about trying to see if we can reimagine or reinvent this notion of manufactured landscape in a way that perhaps we can resolve this contradiction. In a way, some of these activities are generating beautiful landscapes, at least when you see them from above. Of course, we know that the consequences of them can be really, really bad. So for me, the key would be here to try to understand whether we can, you know, at least first, in the first step, use this first experiment to begin to reimagine this idea of manufactured landscape in something that is more integrated, and then maybe try to understand on a deeper level whether the reference image that you are looking at actually manifests this integration between let's say infrastructure and operation. The one that you have now, I think it's very intriguing in terms of the form and morphology, but I don't know if it's actually clearly let's say exemplifying this ability to merge infrastructure and terrain, like for instance the slime mold does in another way, or maybe other examples there could be. The mycelium, for instance, is another example that comes to my mind.
Yeah, in terms of mycelium, there are images at the nanoscale of fibrous
Wait, Claudia,
that could be quite interesting to look at, because it's really important, although it's a short workshop and we cannot work at the moment on the biological material directly. It's really important that you understand what is the biological element you work with, what are the processes that goes on, and at which scale you're looking at this process. Because otherwise, rather than making a translation of a model that is both visual, then maybe brief and process driven, we risk of collaging different processes that don't have anything to do. For example, when you talk about the holes that you see in the image, and you say, okay, this could be separated, the landscape and the inhabitation and the production. I don't think necessarily this is what goes on that image, because the image is working at the nanoscale, I guess, from the type of image that I see. And it's probably, if seen at the scale, it will be about integration of flow of production. So we need to know what the image is and how, what is interesting of that image when used as a model. Otherwise, we might do a nice exercise for the workshop, but we risk in the moment we try to apply it to create, to generate problematic reading, because the side that you show is really about this issue where inhabitation is segregated from production, and how natural system and artificial one integrates. Therefore, maybe the reference that we need to look at need to help us overcome this segregation. I thought about if you're interested in nanoscales of fibrous system and or mycelium, because it's one of the sites seems to have this very striated type of pattern, and this could be something that enable a redescription of that in terms of more architectural prototype.
Well, mycelium is also known as a kind of organism that sort of binds, has this ability to infiltrate gaps and kind of binds together functions. So that could be also quite literally a model, as well as a kind of a morphological reference. So yeah, maybe worth having a look at it.
So, because this reminds me of one research we were doing. I don't know if you see it. These are 3D printed, but they were basically translating nanoscale photo of, I could also then go and source the photo, but I'm sure you will find, of different fibers from cotton to silk, mycelium, and other type of fiber. Look at it at the nanoscale and try to understand how they organize, they interconnect. And then we started to work with 3D printing to basically look at them. But in this case, we could start to work with the GAN to try and understand how this type of logic of interconnection could enable the reorganization of the site, so that there is no segregation between, or clear boundaries between inhabitation and infrastructure, but the two are more interwoven. So yeah, I think this could be a better reference in your case.
Yeah, I think you're right, yeah.
So,
well, it's a good start. I mean, let's try to look for another reference or two that may be interesting to your narrative, and then also maybe put together as soon as you manage the first complete image, so we can also speculate a little bit on that side, and and then push it forward. Yeah, good. Thank you.
Thank you. So next person is Zerui. Hi, nice to meet you.
Hiya. Just give me a second.
Yeah.
Here it is. Okay, so I guess I'll start with a super brief intro about myself. So my name is Yuri, and currently I'm working as a researcher at Princeton University. And my background is in architecture. So just before I start looking at the kind of the brief exercise, that again, it's my first time using CycleGAN as well. So thanks for the team to help me kind of get familiarized with the software process. Okay, so I'm specifically looking at, oh, by the way, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, yes.
Okay, great. So specifically, I'm looking at the West Village neighborhood of New York. And one of the kind of the interesting quality about this neighborhood is that it's kind of has like a very kind of a typical Manhattan edge with sort of this kind of pier-like conditions that kind of protruding into the ocean. But at the same time that within the neighborhood itself, it has kind of clusters of parks, green spaces, such in here, that's the Washington Square Park, here's Union Square, and then there are some other sort of like, almost like a green kind of islands within the kind of the urban fabrics. So the juxtaposition between the two create kind of this kind of a nested island-like condition that's morphologically interesting to test out. So the image on the right is kind of this algae-like images. So what we can also see is not only the kind of the cellular or kind of like nature of these kind of morphologies, but also the kind of the changing scale between some of the smaller parts that tend to cluster. And then we can look at some of the bigger one that kind of start to kind of emerge as well. So I think there is a kind of a interesting relationship between these kind of cells that is kind of comparable to perhaps some of the conditions we found in this neighborhood on the left. So I have not fully trained the images yet, but I do begin to see some of the emerging properties that are kind of start to become visible. So for example, in this case is that we can see a portion of that algae cell is juxtaposed with like the typical Manhattan grid. And then it kind of start to create like kind of this kind of clustered green island condition, whereas the rest of the street and the street and fabrics are kind of like hazed out. So be curious to see how this will kind of manifest in later iterations. Another one is how the bigger sort of algae cells is kind of juxtaposed with the typical Manhattan grid. So we can see the kind of the larger edge condition it's able to create in relationship to the urban fabrics, as well as some of the kind of the parkscape that is able to kind of tessellate within the cell itself. And finally, that this is another condition that is also seems to be kind of indicative of the process, is that in this case, I think it may be because of the pixelization of the algae image itself that we can see this kind of bifurcation in the middle between the two. And that kind of start to kind of split the neighborhood into two in a particular way as well. So I guess here are just the three conditions that I begin to kind of emerge within the conditions I'm looking at. So it'll be interesting to see how those will manifest later on. So yeah. So that's a quick kind of update on my end.
Thank you. It's a great topic. I think it seems like the choice of images actually match the topic quite well. The image on the right it's I think Volvox, I think is called the microalga you are looking at there, and I think you should do a little bit of research on that, because actually Volvox is a very peculiar kind of microalga in that it's actually a collective microalga, which is quite rare in that type of organisms. So that's why in the image it kind of shows these multiple hierarchies. So you see the kind of individual cells which cluster together into super cells, if you want, and then they cluster together again, and then you see there is also a kind of a larger circles of cell coming around the few macro cells. So it's an intriguing organism. And in that sense, I think it could be a very good example for how we may be able to think about, green networks or parks as such in a dense urban environment like New York. And I think it's also good that you took this chunk of New York, which is sort of atypical in a way, because we all kind of used to think about New York as this sort of a very segregated system with dominated by Central Park, and other than that everything is pretty much artificial. But obviously in this part of the city it's unlike that, and I think it's also very interesting topic when it comes to the current discourse about post-pandemic cities, and how do you imagine a possibility for distributed systems where the kind of vulnerability that comes from high concentration of individuals can be managed. And again, Volvox, as you can see, kind of creates multiple orders of clusterization. So maybe we can begin to think about parks that are made up of a lot of little cells, the little green units, which are clustered at multiple levels or orders. So it's that could be an intriguing concept, almost like you have a kind of mega park that encompasses the whole city, but is made up of multiple hierarchies of smaller park clustered in different ways and at different levels. And I think that's an intriguing topic. And I have the feeling that this image that you will be composing could be quite powerful in terms of bringing this topic on the table. My question was only like from some of the tiles, it looks like the satellite image has got like texts and stuff on it. Am I wrong, or?
It shouldn't, but I think, yeah, I think it certainly looks like that. I'll double check.
I mean, considering that, obviously the main output of this will be determined by the materiality of that image, because obviously the morphological logics comes from the biological reference, but the materiality comes from the satellite image. I would recommend you to create really crisp high-res image of that area without labels and without text on it, so that doesn't end up confusing. And I think for New York City it's certainly possible, because there is very high resolution satellite. And so you see that this has got a lot of noise, which is basically created by labels. And so yeah, just go. I mean, you can use the map puzzle. I think we probably gave you this little tool.
Right, I actually used the processing to slice. Sorry, the software to slice the image.
Yeah, but I mean, like when you create your initial satellite image, make sure that you use the the one without labels, and probably also take away the 3D buildings function, which normally creates all kind of meshy stuff, and you will get a really, really nice, crisp, high-res satellite image, where then will give you a much better result, because then in the end the outcome will be very much determined by how crisp that image of the city is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, and right now, unfortunately, all these texts and labels and so on will essentially end up confusing a little bit the final outcome, the final materiality.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with at the moment, I do like your selection of 2 images, and I think with New York it's possible to work very well, because there are usually on city like London and New York very high resolution images, but the way you probably, there is some technical problem that doesn't allow us to see the result very well. It's difficult to see the impact. I appreciate the fact that you started to catalog the result, but visually is not so emergent at the moment. So, but the premises I think are good, and also the choice of microalgae. If you look more into that, the fact that it's collective is it's another element that in terms of urban design or distribution of greening in the city could be of interest. In the moment we see maybe the final image, or not as a final image, but maybe work on a sequence of them that can look at how green in the city could be an emergent property of collective behavior and proximity of green patches that create a sort of microecology, rather than the definition of a very geometrical park. So that is it's a good brief. And as I said, I appreciate the fact that you started to catalog the result, but visually, I was understanding what you were saying, but visually I struggle to see it. Somehow the visual language is not as strong as your pickup of case studies and your interpretation of it. And I think there are all the possibility to get it on the same level, so that the result is more, it's clear on a design level. Do you understand? Yeah.
Okay, great.
Cool.
Great, thank you for your feedback.
Cool, thank you. Next one is Caroline.
Hi, I'm Caroline. Thanks for having me. And okay, I'm gonna, well, I study architecture in my master's at TU Berlin. And I'm gonna try to share my screen now.
Okay.
Do you see my screen now? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Well, just maybe just a bit to contextualize, like it was also my first time running the cycle again. So thanks also for the help. I could choose the images and also slice it using, for example, this is my source image. It is an image of a city called Sabeta, which is in a polar circle in the fjords in Russia. Like this is one image of this area actually of the polar circle seen from above. And Sabeta is one of the cities that is right now, like it's a very important infrastructural node, and it's kind of growing. And it has a very important role actually as a natural gas extraction plant. And also it's quite close to where oil is being drilled as well. So this was actually part of a previous project, and it is actually analyzing where the gas is actually being extracted and how the city is actually been growing. So, well, to the image and high resolution that I took, for example, these are settlements. They're more like actually between 3,000 and 5,000 people living in this area right now. And those are actually, you can more or less see also a little bit of the pipes for the extraction, and also this lake landscape in Sabeta. And these are actually the natural gas plant, and here the port. And for example, the settlements, there's actually also a church. And it's kind of a mixture of human with a non-human landscape, which is kind of intertwined, but not really, because it is very segregated as well. You see on the form. And I have the GAN at the moment actually running. It's about I run about 109 iterations, and those are actually the results that I have until now. Like, it's quite in the beginning still. And I chose, it was more of an experiment, I guess, as well. I chose one of the mold images, which were in the data sets. And I actually would like also to exchange or to change this image probably for running the GAN again, so that I can find another principle probably on how this kind of city in the Arctic could evolve. Yeah, exactly. So, for example, yeah, I also haven't assembled them yet. Exactly, and that's actually the image that I, the pattern that I took first.
Hey, wait, I think we have the echo here. So thanks for the presentation. The site is super intriguing. I think it's perhaps also in the categories of manufactured landscapes as such, right? But at the same time, the reference of slime mold could be actually a very good choice for this project. There is something like quite interesting also in some of the images that you were showing so far. In my mind, this is something that I would like to maybe everyone to try to do. Looking at this, the evolution of these epochs is very interesting. But actually, you see that you have 8 images for each epoch, no? And it would be interesting to kind of organize them in a way that we can see, let's say, the 8 images on a line, right? So that basically each epoch is a line, and then we create several lines for several epochs. In this way, we can essentially see images of the same categories organized in columns, right? So you got the real A, for instance, in the first column, and then real B in the second, fake A, fake B, whatever, right? So in this way, it's obviously the tiles will change, so you don't see the evolution of the same tile, but you can see the evolution of how the algorithm is beginning to recognize certain features, and it's able to eventually improve it's the quality of the fake image, to use the language of this. So in that sense, I mean, for all of you, it would be interesting to do this little experiment, create like a nice catalog where you have these 8 images on a line, and then different epochs one after the other as a way of exploring the evolution of this. And you could also, like I think Irene was suggesting before, extrapolate and recompose the entire image at certain moments of the simulation. So not necessarily only at 200 epochs, but also kind of intermediate steps. Having said that, here you can already see like how close is matching, for instance, some elements of the infrastructure to the body of the slime mold. But again, for me, what is more intriguing here would be to see how is capturing this kind of ambiguity in the slime mold, being, let's say, an organism that is, if you want, at the same time network and the surface or environment. You know, the way the slime mold in itself is a kind of distributed brain that computes through its environment, but at the same time that makes it continuously adjust his networked body. No? And this kind of logic, I think, could be applied very well to your scenario. And I think it's the fact that this logic is currently very different from the way we, or let's say engineers, normally go about designing infrastructure, is why normally these kind of frontier cities tend to be very much at odds with the landscapes that they inhabit, because they respond to completely different logics. And the logics of infrastructure is completely different from the logic of the landscape it actually inhabits, or in many cases colonizes. So again, I mean, from my point of view, it seems like you have a good starting point, very good choice. Something that could be interesting is that I also noticed that maybe Claudia wants to say something more about this. You have also some very beautiful diagrams, right, that you have done on this region. And I wonder whether they can also come in and kind of inform a little bit of this experiment. Let's say, in other words, you have the slime mold actually working as a kind of a biological model of a kind of networked being. But on the other hand, you also have made several drawings of network, right? So it would be interesting to see whether you could also use one of these drawings to perhaps run side by side with a slime mold and create, or let's say virtually grow a slime mold that works on that sort of terrain. Rather than being a kind of generic slime mold morphology.
Yeah. In that sense, maybe I repeat something we discussed also with other group. Is basically we have seen a few biological model, but the same amount of diagram that you have about the site, it would be unspeakable to have them about the biological model. Because, for example, the photo that you use at the moment is a photo of a project that was a work in progress photo. And if you look at the photo itself, even before understanding what the photo of the slime mold was used for, you can easily see that the food source are very big. So unless this is something that is very important in your project, I think they will have a very big impact on the result without necessarily being part of the behavior of the slime mold itself, or bringing elements that are part of the bottom-up behavior. So this is to say that there needs to be a diagramming or an understanding of why one image of the slime mold rather than another one, and what the different part of that image can bring when interface with the gun. Otherwise, it will be maybe unspeakable to start from diagrams that are network, as Marco suggested, that are already part of your project, and then slowly start to process the slime mold. And once you are more familiar with it, even by working with reference, but cataloging, understanding the different experiment, understanding which image have an impact of the food source, which is higher in comparison to others, then start to use the slime mold. But otherwise, you could effectively start from some of the diagram you have already, over which you have higher level of control, and therefore might be more integrated at the moment in the project.
Okay.
Does it make sense?
Yes, it does. I just wonder, like, how exactly I would be able actually to follow this kind of relations, to work with it on the GAN actually. So that it would make sense actually to mix it with the with the slime mold.
Well, I will keep them separated for the moment. On the slime mold, I would suggest to look at, for example, you can look at that project and a sequence in time, or you can look at the video and extract different frame. You can have different case studies of slime mold. I mean, for this purpose, unfortunately, some of the scientific experiments that have been done on slime mold, I don't think they are really appropriate to use, because many computer science use food source that are very big and visually impactful when they work with slime mold, because their aim is mainly to recompute the distribution of path of the slime mold, and is not so much based on visual recognition and pattern. But if we work with pattern, having big food source has got a very strong impact. So you need to try and find either another image of slime mold or crop it differently. Otherwise, that unbalance, because it's not part of the simulation of the slime mold, it's just an accident, if you understand what I mean. And it's something that, for example, when we work with slime mold, we work with it a lot in trying to understand how do we print the food sources, so that in terms of resolution, they are comparable with the redistribution on the network. So when you work with them visually, they are less impactful, and you can concentrate on the network.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the diagram, maybe which kind of element do you think, Marco, we could?
I mean, here there are several layers. Now, I thought it could be interesting to extract some of these layers and try to bring them into the simulation. Also, maybe like trying to run a simulation between slime mold and one of these drawings.
Okay.
Maybe she can decide which one, but for instance, these white little network lines, I don't know, would be interesting.
Yeah, maybe it would be easier for us to comment on that, to see the layers separated. Otherwise, you can, run a test to translate the slime mold to this. You can switch on. So.
Yeah, because I mean, something that I'm a bit confused by this image, although I like it as an image, is that there is a combination of, let's say, a drawing that look more like algorithmic, basically like proximity networks, connecting nodes, with lines, with other type of representation that looks more like a symbolic, with these different colors pattern. And so I think they, together, maybe they are difficult to use as an input in algorithmic process, because they bring together two very distinct kind of information. So it would be interesting if you could extrapolate, for instance, a drawing that is purely network based, for instance, so that actually captures the existing urban networks, but also maybe your new links or, simulated proximities like that you have been drawing, which is sort of what I kind of see in this image, and brings it brings it out from the rest, and see if that can be used to train a special version of the GAN together with the slime mold as another input in the data set, and yeah, see what happens. That could be also intriguing. But yeah, but at the same time, it's it's good to complete the one that you're running now, which I think could be very interesting, and yeah, see where we get from there.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So now, if there are no other questions, we will take Marco and myself 10-minute breaks. If you have any technical question, you can ask to Irini, that will be here. And then we will do a short presentation that we can comment all together. Any question? Cool. So I'll see you in 10-15 minutes. Let's say 12:05 UK time, 1:05 Central European time, or wherever you are, maybe calculate it if you are somewhere else. I'm not gonna do the all latitude on the planet. Okay, cool. See you in 10 minutes. Thank you. If you have any question, Irini can answer. Also, the Hodgkin student can ask. Thanks. Thanks.
You can ask otherwise you can
I have a question. How is it with the resolution of the satellite images? Do the two images, like the test A and test B, do they have to correspond? That they have to be the same size? Or can I, for example, have the satellite image for 15,000 by 15,000 and the other one just 5,000 by 5,000 or something?
It doesn't matter. You can have different resolution, but what it matters it's to be like square and square, to have the same shape. So 5,000 by 5,000 and 50,000 by 50,000, it's okay.
So it's resizing it anyway in the processing later.
Because, it takes the shape and it does the slices, the first algorithm of the processing.
But it's probably going to take much longer if it's like twice the size. I probably have 4 times the tiles, or
always, because if you keep the values that we discussed about for the processing, so like but you resize before in Photoshop, so they are
Excuse me, Irini.
Hello, yeah.
Hey, thanks for all the help yesterday. Is it outlined how to combine the images with the second processing script?
So you finished the training,
Yeah.
right? Did you do the testing, or do we need to? After training, if you remember the manual PDF, we have also the phase of testing. So you need
Okay.
again to drag CD and drag your folder inside the command terminal of Anaconda, and then
Right.
it is gonna take just 10 minutes. So if you want to do a testing for other epochs also, we can also do that for quick. And after you have your slices in the result folder, then we can combine them.
Okay, cool. I haven't done the testing yet.
Okay, yeah, we
Okay.
can proceed with that. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
facciamo prima, no? Perché...
Come lo metto il background anche io?
Dopo.
Hello?
Cambia.
Mi sentiamo? Mi sentiamo? Hello?
I don't know if they are hearing us.
Yeah, they
Yes.
are.
Okay,
They're just
good.
all muted. Okay. So we have
Muovimi qua.
we have a bit of a presentation that discuss our approach and our interest on the deep green. So maybe Marco, you would like to share the screen?
Sure.
This is mainly to give you also an idea of what is behind our interest in the deep green and the technique we are exploring this week. So that by the end of the week and by the end of the presentation, you will have an overview of what is our interest in the technique. So we will not have a presentation that discuss the technique itself, but more a sequence of research projects and how they led us to develop this technique and work with this approach.
So you can get into my screen now. Perfect. So can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes. And you can also see the presentation, right? Okay, perfect. So yeah, this is us, obviously. And we just make a first quick introduction about the work we've been doing, so that you can get a little bit of a bigger context for how do we get to where we are. And so we our projects, as you may know, deal with the advanced integration of nature in the built environment, and we have been exploring that through both material prototypes, small architectures, as well as the digital design projects. This is an example of some of the recent things we have done in Milano. This is in the expo where we built the urban algae canopy with 2,000 liters of living cyanobacteria growing within the structure itself. And this is in the Expo Astana, where we built the first biotechnological dwelling, which was designed to be self-sufficient. And we recently also worked with the integration of the 3D printing technologies with living organisms. And this is a project we presented in Saint Pompidou last year. And it's a large 3D printed sculpture with living cyanobacteria growing within it. And this is a cladding system. It's a part of the work we've done with Photosynthetica, which is a venture that brings together Ecologic Studio and the University of Innsbruck and UCL in developing essentially technologies for advanced integration of nature in the built environment. There is a photosynthetic urban curtain. And as Claudia mentioned already, together with the work of Ecologic Studio, there is a research going on. Here's a very quick example of some of the work that has been done both here in London at the Urban Morphogenesis Lab in Innsbruck, in the Synthetic Landscape Lab.
So the aim in this sense is to, what is, as we say, create a sort of alliance with a form of non-human intelligence, such as microorganism, therefore microalgae, spider, molds, as well as artificial form of intelligence and human. As you saw before, big part of our work focus also on the microalgae, which are bacteria, are one of the consequences of climate change. So they are suffocating many of the sea on the planet, but also have incredible property of being able to produce protein, absorb many of the byproduct of the urban sphere, such as CO2 and particles in the air. So the question is not how we make use of microalgae, but how through architecture and spatial language, therefore spatial articulation, we are able to create an alliances with organisms that are able to thrive on byproduct of our society and elements that are effectively dangerous for us as human species. So because these microorganisms effectively are expressing themselves through material language, then architecture becomes a means or an interface to communicate with the rest of the planet and develop a design language which comes from a non-anthropocentric perspective.
I guess this is a shift as a main scope also to move forward the whole environmental movement in architecture, urban design. You may call it the green ideology, which of course has had an impact in moving forward the discourse, but in many respects is a kind of hiding a paradox whereby there's a kind of a greening of nature has a sort of excluded some of the aspects that are more relevant to the contemporary urban sphere, like these aspects that are not green as such, but that are really fundamental to the way cities function. So as Claudia was mentioning, it's really about looking at the metabolic aspects of what contemporary cities are and how dependent we still are from what we may call linear flows. So, we just saw in some of your projects effectively how diffused and distributed is now this network of mines, reservoir dams, wind farms, as well as on the other hand, landfills, waste, polluted landscapes, which are effectively the consequences of this linear metabolism. And at the moment, it's still very much down to the biosphere to try to close the loop and then sort of recirculate back some of these substances. And that as with the kind of growing urban population that we have seen is obviously creating many criticalities which are manifested in many ways, and obviously more recently in this global health crisis that we are facing. And so essentially it's about looking at physical rebalancing of flows, and is the example of CO2, but it's not just that, of course, and in terms of understanding the ability of the urban sphere to recirculate these materials. And so sites like these and many others, this is from some of our research and work that we've done recently from Innsbruck University, as well as our UNDP collaboration. It's kind of becomes obvious that urban ecology today is not just about regreening or the green aspect, but it's really more profoundly about the intelligence of these infrastructures and their ability to co-evolve with the systems of the biosphere.
So basically, if we look at the existing method of urban design, we are still in a paradigm that we inherited from modernity of zoning. So segregation of the productive area from inhabitation and of organization of programming courses. This has created not only the problem of waste, but also problem of disconnection between the end user and effectively what waste, pollutant are, what the byproduct of our society are. But in systemic term, there is not this disconnection. What we can call the dark side of ecology is interconnected with the ecology itself. And especially bacteria and microorganisms can have incredible property in remetabolizing some of these elements and generate new material, as you can see in this example here of microbial cellulose, and as well as new architectural spaces.
Yeah, I mean, one of the examples that we have been working with for quite a while now, and so that's why actually it's probably driving some of the largest prototypes and test project we have done is microalgae, and essentially they are an organism that is really ubiquitous in the biosphere, and they are responsible for absorbing the majority of CO2 on Earth, or capturing the majority of CO2 on Earth, and also one of the oldest organisms on Earth. So effectively, they have evolved form of biological intelligence that is very ancient, and that's why somehow they have this ability to grow and proliferate pretty much everywhere, even in the most contaminated or extreme environments. And our research in that sense was really based on the assumption that we could begin to design artificial habitats for these organisms to grow in the urban realm, where larger forms of nature often struggle to grow and proliferate because of the lack of space and light and so on, and therefore basically begin to imagine a new photosynthetic layer of the city that would act as a catalyst for the conversion of pollutant into raw material and into resources feeding the city. So essentially creating a new mechanism for closing the loop of resources and convert pollutant into raw material. This is an example of one of the projects we have done, integrating this logic into a facade system, or into actually a soft retrofitting layer for existing buildings. The way it works is quite simple. Essentially, is driven by the sun and the solar energy, essentially powered by photosynthesis, which happens within the microalgae cells. And the system is designed so that air, like dirty air from the city, can be injected from the bottom and naturally raised through these snaky paths where there is enough time to exchange with the molecules suspended in the medium, in the liquid medium, and through photosynthesis basically be remetabolized and fresh oxygen being released on the top. It's a process that, when compared to the similar process, let's say, occurring in large trees, it appears extremely efficient. The entire body of microalgae is photosynthetic, whereas in large trees only the external leaves effectively participate in the process. So when you compare that in terms of the space it occupies and the weight, you have basically an extreme level of efficiency. Only 50 kilograms or liters of algae absorb the same amount of CO2 as a mature tree. So again, what we were saying is that through nature-based technologies of this kind, one of the benefits is that you're not just absorbing or capturing pollutants or filtering pollutants, but essentially you are remetabolizing them. They actually are, they become food for these microorganisms, which actually eat them up and transform them into biomass, which has multiple applications. Already today, there is an industry that makes use of these organisms for many products, from superfood to biofuels and bioplastics and other applications. So essentially, we can really create essentially circular economies that are powered by the sun and by the intelligence of these organisms. And this is another case study of an application in Helsinki. And this is another project that was bringing the same logic into a public realm. In fact, here, this little sculpture, little pavilion, was used to essentially grow the microorganisms in the port of Aarhus in Denmark, and reveal the kind of diversity that exists already in most cities and in water bodies. And so how much, in fact, this layer of nature is already urban in a way. And so why not beginning to make use of it in a more purposeful way.
So how does this relate to the DeepGreen? So in this specific project, for example, there was this micro algae farm on the port, but was connected to the project Aarhus Wet City that we were developing with the city of Aarhus, where we map basically the network of green infrastructure in the city and started to understand how the presence of green could be redistributed and not so conceived as close in a park, but more as part of distributed water body and soil and patches of green. So the green network would be recomputed as a distributed system rather than a segregated one, and this was one of the hub in that sense.
Yeah, so the sculpture would be understood as a sort of a node into this new system that would connect landscape and infrastructure, unfold one into the other. And this same logic was taken forward in the project you've seen before in Milano for the canopy. And there's a little video here that shows this in action. And in this case, the cultures were flowing into the membranes, which are made of ETFE, and create these artificial habitats. So the entire canopy was, in fact, a photosynthetic layer. And it's interesting to see how that also manifests into these patterns and movements and bubbling, which becomes a part of an expanded fabric of architecture. So yeah, this idea of nature becoming part of a new kind of infrastructure that has spatial and material qualities was also at the core of this project, which we presented in Paris last year. Want to say something?
Well, in this case, there are two lines of photosynthetic architecture that we've been developing. One works more on the integration of microalgae inside of existing facade, and the other one explore more the morphological articulation of environment hosting microalgae and interacting with direct cultivation. Here you see an action of cyber gardening. In this case, we work with a 3D printed substratum where the microalgae will be inoculated, also printed, in the idea that in the future there could be a more seamless relationship between substratum and biological and growing element. So it's not anymore about a photobioreactor, a container, a facade that incorporate the microalgae, but they become part of the medium of architecture itself and interacting one-to-one with the air and water of the planet, and visually become an indicator of the quality of the environment that they inhabit. So some of the pattern of growth are a direct response of the CO2 that is present in the space, as well as the O2 that is emitted. This was part of the process of inoculation in the Center Pompidou, but there is an idea that this could be automated and become part of the system of 3D printing in itself.
Yeah, the project also was exhibited in Tokyo and the Mori Art Museum. And here it was quite an interesting, let's say, exhibition room at the 54th floor of the Mori Tower with this huge window in front. And it was intriguing because obviously the same artwork was all of a sudden acquiring a very different dimension with the backdrop of Tokyo and the sort of became the excuse to begin to reflect upon how this model could be understood at a larger scale as a kind of model for transforming the urban realm. And so this became also the starting point for a more speculative vision of a very large photosynthetic tower, where these kind of technologies you have just seen essentially become the core systems for powering the structures itself. And so the structure operates at the urban scale quite literally as a microclimatic moderator and filter, but within its organism, it remetabolizes what it extracts from the city and feeds it back as a useful raw material for a whole series of new programs that are taking place within it. And these are obviously living research working programs for humans, but also for other ecosystems and species that will be part of this larger artificial habitat. This is a kind of view from the interior side, where essentially the thick skin of the building becomes the actual inhabited part, and the sort of empty core creates a large urban interior, mitigated and moderated by the functions of the building itself. Right now we are working on a one-to-one prototype of one of the large cells, and which was supposed to be exhibited pretty much now in the Corderie as part of the international exhibition of the Venice Biennale, but it will be, as you know, it has been postponed to next year. So hopefully we will be able to continue this project and materialize one of the living units in the next year event in Venice. This is in any case very much inspired by this project that we did materialize in Astana in Kazakhstan for the Expo in 2017, and it was really an attempt to demonstrate how these technologies can be integrated in a space that it is inhabitable, and that it actually can provide enough resources for a family to survive within it. And it was built as a kind of demonstration space for the Expo, but essentially all of the systems were fully functional, and in fact were maintaining around 2,000 liters of living culture at all time. And do you want to continue on this? And yeah, essentially there were different zones demonstrating also the different way in which we can engage with nature. So the lab was showing the more scientific and rational part, the way we actually dive into the microscopic world through the technologies that we have, and we can understand the diversity of species and properties in the realm, and also the ability that these have in terms of translating, remetabolizing solar energy into potential fuel and energy to power our homes.
Yeah, in the biotech art, this number becomes material articulation, as it was possible to experience in the art room, where with one-to-one visual and material interaction with the production of microalgae. And they want to create a shift from the idea of still modernist idea of the architecture as a machine for living to a form of living machine that evolve day by day through interaction with the human and the environment in which it's embedded.
So this part of the hut had this big living sculpture, which was working effectively as a bioreactor, but also allowed for a much deeper immersive experience, and also a pretty direct exchange of CO2 from the exhale of the visitor and the oxygen emitted by the sculpture itself. And finally, the garden area was the area of production, and where we were harvesting the algae themselves, and essentially involved visitors into processes of cultivation and eventual consumption of these organisms that, of course, are considered as the most nutritious on Earth, and in fact, their proteic value is comparable, if not superior, to the one of meat, and therefore become a very potentially viable substitute for meat-based protein in the future. And this is a little bit more about the actual design of the pavilion and the various layers, the photoreactors, the structure layer, and the final results. So Claudia was mentioning that, you know, this is all about sort of shifting from a perspective of architecture and from the machine age, if you want, to an architecture that is understood as a living system. And obviously, this living system incorporates the multiple scales, including the human, but not just that one. And so this expansion of scales is really at the core, I think, also of this workshop that we are doing together. And that's why we tried to bring in this territorial as well as microscopic scale, almost to show how it is possible today to begin to design with a scope that goes well beyond the traditional accepted scale of architecture. And so similarly, we have engaged with projects that, starting from considerations of infrastructure nature, they have then evolved into this multiple scalar application. This is Tallinn, the capital of Estonia, where Claudia curated the Biennale of Architecture in 2017. And the main topic was effectively looking at the city and its wastewater system in conjunction with the status of its coastline as being prone to flooding, especially as the level of the sea will rise. So how can these two elements of water become a part of a new way of understanding the city? And one of the key considerations when you start thinking from, let's say, centralized machine age system to this form of distributed intelligence, it becomes immediately visible when you draw each building and each spaces in the city as not just the receiver of matter, but also as a producer, no, as an entity that is able to synthesize matter. So you go from a network model of this kind to a network model of this kind, where the exchange between producers and consumers is effectively much more nonlinear, complex, and distributed. And we started to also begin to create a series of speculative images that were imagining scenarios of a flooded Tallinn growing this new kind of infrastructure that would allow the city to function in this sort of new
so this will rethink about the water, then the green infrastructure in Tallinn is distributed rather than centralized system, and would apply technique of computation using data, high resolution data, to what traditionally is the green-blue planning that is quite been implemented quite a lot around the Baltic Sea, but traditionally looks more at a limited amount of green and blue corridor, where in this case we work with it in high resolution, almost like as the green infrastructure of the city becomes a second skin for the city itself, with different gradient of density. So you see here the paths are the one that connect the actual inhabitation with the nearest green patch that could be considered a park, but simply the presence of the green that could be captured by the satellite.
So this is a video, maybe you want to...
In the case of Tallinn, we work also with an artist to capture this simulation of the slime hole. In this case, you see the peninsula of Paljassaare, which is the area where the wastewater treatment of Tallinn currently happen. And we use the slime mold algorithm to redistribute the wastewater treatment plant from a centralized system, which is segregated from the rest of the peninsula, this is a Methodological part, to a system which is distributed in pools and allow the processing of the wastewater, but and the coexistence with the ornithological park present in the site.
Yeah, what we found quite fascinating about this video is, you know, really the way the slime mold negotiates this 3D printed replica of the landscape of Paljassaare, and as you can see, you can really understand how the intelligence of the system actually progresses through a series of iterative moments of scanning and exploring the landscape, and then essentially retreating and reinforcing those line that connects the most, let's say, suitable locations, or the location with most nutrients. So there is never a final solution, let's say, to this optimization problem, but is a continuous learning process, if you want, as in a continuous evolving condition. So this became, of course, a kind of operational metaphor, if you want, for the way we may begin to understand and conceptualize urban infrastructure, where we start thinking of buildings as entities that are effectively producing as well as consuming resources. And so, of course, this can be translated into computational logics, if you want, but essentially they need to be reconceptualized in a form of planning that it's never finished, if you want. It's a continuously evolving and learning process. So we may begin to think about planning as an activity that very much develops a form of artificial intelligence that defines that particular city. And since the cities are now connected globally, we may begin to imagine the urban sphere as developing his own form of artificial intelligence. And hopefully, if we are able to design the right elements or create, feed the right level of information, then this intelligence may lead to more sustainable model of coevolution, if you want. And so that's a little bit where this workflow, which we call DeepGreen, comes about. It is essentially an attempt to begin to coordinate and orchestrate a series of data sets that are available, and most of them are open source, and therefore you know, can be really harvested by all of us as such, and kind of channel them into a form of computation that kind of outputs continuously updated and upgraded solutions for us to develop and evolve new policies or new urban planning logics or solutions. And that's the way it works, is very much gathering input from a digital elevation model, GIS models, satellite models, and creating a middle ground, which we call this biotic analysis and path system and network analysis. This level essentially is about processing data and creating outputs that are readable or can be read by, in this case, the cycle gun algorithms, could be others as well, and to essentially produce these kind of simulated future visions of the cities. And of course, the more precise, the more geographically coherent the data set is, and obviously the more the outcome can be can be applicable. Nevertheless, I believe that, and this is what we are exploring with you guys these days, I believe there is a layer of speculation that can come before or even on top of this level of more precise geographic work that is equally valuable in terms of pushing the way we think and the way we understand the design today.
Yeah, that is one of the advantages, for example, of working directly with biological element or knowing the sources of your original biological image in the case of the work we are doing, because this will sit in the middle ground of density map and path system. But if the biological reference bear no relationship with the existing site, then the result might end up of difficult interpretation or evolution in terms of project. And he said that this is something that is possible to explore in the workshop, as Marcus said, in terms of speculation, but it becomes more attuned and integrated the more we are able to relate it to parameter of the site and control it as well. In terms of behavior,
I think the interest of DeepGreen, it's for us essentially to be able to expand the applicability of nature-based solution from, let's say, practical solution to material problems. So essentially considering nature-based solution as one-to-one material solution to their approach as model of development or model of behavior. So in this way, we are expanding the levels at which we read these models or the way in which we engage with these models. And in that sense, we created the possibility for this transcalar approach to become possible. No? So on one side, Algae may be a real material technology to apply on a building facade, but on the other end, the collective behavior of the Volvox species, for instance, may become actually a strategic logic for designing parks, park infrastructure in a city, right? And the two may be actually directly connected, through the scales, but the meaning they have at different scales also differs. And while maybe it was really hard to do that until a few years ago, because we didn't have the tools to begin to draw and manipulate multiple scales with that level of resolution, the techniques that we have now actually enable that. And I think that's what is really fantastic. We can actually draw, urban air pollution at a very, very high resolution, and we can begin to manipulate the satellite image at an incredibly fine resolution too, and begin to generate scenarios that capture that relationship in a way that is really finely grained. And this is some of the early application last year, and this is how this methodology was then applied in this project in Guatemala. Is one of the case study cities we looked at in our collaboration with the United Nations Development Program. And I'm gonna go a little fast here, but Guatemala City is a city that is struggling with a very problematic relationship with the territory and the landscape, not just because of the contamination of it, but also the instability, the resulting instability of the landscape itself is now threatening the city's ability to perform its functions. So for us, it was interesting to begin to look at this relationship starting from the really large territorial scale and then go zoom in at the very fine grain. So this is a drawing extrapolating from GIS, the model of the existing infrastructure. And this is an overlay of the infrastructure with the topographic qualities in different soil composition and stability of the soil. And this is a zooming into a neighborhood scale, looking at the way this network infrastructure relates to the landscape, and how, for instance, waste disposal or collection networks may emerge at the bottom, from the bottom up, from the scale of the neighborhood, and then growing up into larger systems. This has all been drawn starting from open source data and with the grasshopper techniques. And this is a computing these larger collection networks at the urban scale with different main locations where different type of waste may be collected. And these networks were, as I said, simulated from data sets we gathered from open source. And now my presentation is actually got stuck for a second. Okay. And we then tried to essentially bring in the kind of logic of organism like slime mold in understanding how this network could be growing in time or evolving in time as a kind of a collaborative bottom-up logic, very much in the understanding that a city like Guatemala is driven by a high level of informality. A lot of the, let's say, energy that kind of powers and fuels the city comes from these, let's say, informal processes and gatherings. And it's a kind of overlay of the two logics. And this is some, again, gun experiment with reimagining the city from this perspective. So where the, let's say, urban fabric is a kind of eroded and densified along these main networks, emerging networks, and the interstitial spaces are regreened and rewilded with different strategies, so that the original landscape is reconstructed through the ability of these systems to stabilize the soil and create a substratum that hosts multiple species of wildlife as well as humans. And I think with this example, we close the presentation for now. Otherwise, it's getting too long. But maybe you guys want to jump in.
But mainly, you can see here, the idea is to create this form of interrelationship between multiple parameters and also multiple form of intelligence with which we can interact to evolve the cities or shift the attention of design as a form of co-evolutionary system with what we call bio-citizen. And now, yeah, if there are questions, the presentation was probably a little bit long, but
the few faces I can see are still awake. So
okay,
it's good.
Adam?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, the process of how it's gone from all the scales that you're addressing. The bit that I'm really interested in is the sort of the unit of matter that you're using, where it's sort of this tension between how the context is evolving continuously, or the system is, and the algae. Do you see it as like as a way of offsetting some things, as well as also the use of the scaffolding that is used to grow the algae? So is there a way of incorporating, or stuff that I did with the thesis is using scaffolding to rematerialize, to have like some symbiotic nature with the algae to get structural properties out of it? Does it, I suppose the question is the use of algae in these sort of systems as a way of offsetting something, or can it become a new materiality to grow architectural structures and adapt their properties? And you see that sort of space in certainly the last sort of installations, the one in the Pompidou, where the algae is in the sort of the scaffold what is the role of the scaffold? Do you know what I mean?
Well, there are always hierarchies. Not everything needs to be up to Algae, no. When we mention, living architecture, we cannot be living just because of biological material, and this is another element of interest of the DeepGreen. So if you imagine an architecture that grow is a machinic system where there is a microalgae, but there might be also on-site 3D printer, robot, human. There is a collaboration, but you shift the attention from an architecture that can get built and is conceived as static. I'm using its conceiving purpose because architecture is also never so static, but is conceived as static, to an architecture that is conceived as behavioral, and especially as an interface that allow a higher level of communication between different systems, another layer of dynamic, because dynamic is inherently present. So it's just a question of enabling it through architecture. In that sense, in the Pompidou, we had a substratum that would create the spatial articulation and the relationship with the light as well as with the user, and host the microalgae, in this case, hosted in biogel. There were two levels of substratum, because there is a larger substratum in bioplastic, but then there is the substratum in biogel. The algae are growing on that medium in that case rather than water. And of course, it's not a question of simply absorbing pollutant, but rethink the way we consider pollutant. Pollutant is not a black box or bad guy in the room. It's just a material that is present in the air that is maybe in excessive quantity due to the infrastructure we have built as human. But if we can visualize it and create a different relationship with the elements that are present in there, maybe we could trigger a form of collective intelligence, a form of self-organization in the system, where it's not up to us as humans to control the overall system, but to deploy an architecture that allow a rebalances of the system in itself. So that would be my answer to your question.
Yeah, on that sort of subsystems and stuff, I recently read, I don't know if you've came across René Dusat's work, where he just like evolves core subsystems. Mm-hmm. He does stuff with morphogenetic engineering. I don't know if that's something that's that sort of.
In morphogenetic systems, there are always substratum that host other elements. There are hierarchies. So we could have a smoother transition between different system and substratum, but there is always a hierarchy. It's not a question of a mono material system or mono ecology.
Yeah, I guess when you think about integrative design as a way of basically nesting a system into the other, there is always a kind of exchange between these different levels, but at the same time they are distinct, and I think that's okay. I also think that when we let's say go back to the urban realm, there are multiple level of substratum that are there and have been there for a long time, which we cannot let's say redescribe from scratch all the time. Even if you are let's say building on a fresh new landscape, is never fresh and new. It's only fresh and new if you ignore the systems and substratums that are there. So I guess our approach is to build a kind of workflow that is sensitive to these multiple layer, even the one that are not visible, for instance, and it's capable of basically visualizing, drawing, representing, materializing these multiple levels in the way that we can begin to establish relationship between them. And in that case, some of these relationship may be, let's say, mutually enhancing, if you want. And in that sense, basically allow for, closed loop, circular economies, if you want, to emerge, which is somehow one of the key elements in my mind of thinking about an expansion or expand the definition of green to a much, let's say, deeper understanding of intelligence and systems. If we, if we don't do that, then you may plant a million of trees and still operate in a linear metabolic logic, right? Where you keep planting trees and the trees keep dying, and then you keep planting new ones, and and many of them, produce pretty much nothing for you, and so on and so forth. So I guess that's the kind of a level of expansion that we're trying to bring. And this obviously, like Claudia was mentioning before, goes along to a redefinition of some of the typological categories that we normally know. Like when you talk about a facade, you don't normally understand it as a kind of two-dimensional layer that divides the inside and the outside. But if you think about the Pompidou as a sculpture, as a kind of a envelope, obviously it brings up a whole other set of considerations, because it's inherently three-dimensional, thick, wet, alive, porous, blah blah blah, right? And the same you could say at the urban scale for a park, which is normally understood as a green patch, bordered by built environment. But essentially, if you look at it from the perspective that we are trying to bring forward, that it can just be understood as a node within a kind of expanded ecosystem, whereby seeds and waters and other type of elements and pollutants are being absorbed and released, and so on and so forth. So it's a much more porous, thick, three-dimensional dynamic logic. And so as a consequence, I guess we wanted to try to use our design and creativity and ingenuity, like we are trying to do in these few days with you guys, to really begin to think beyond what is the kind of accepted typological definitions. And for instance, this kind of image that now we have adopted as a sort of a background, I suppose, of the workshop, kind of brings up these ideas, like what kind of a new typological arrangements we can begin to imagine that really break these categories and kind of hybridize functions in a way that really enable the new circularity of information, matter, energy to emerge.
Thank you. There is another question. I think Salvador.
Yeah. Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Nice to meet you all.
Nice to
nice
meet you.
I'm from Guatemala, by the way.
Perfect.
Talking to you, everyone. Yeah, and thank you very much for all your work. It's amazing. I really love that. When I see the República Alimentaria as well, it was a really cool project. So, well, one of my biggest questions is about if this type of project will be implemented, like, or could embed it in the social problem housing deficit in countries like here, like to have this system and to just basically to help other people to produce themselves another way or another resource to survive in these countries that are a little bit hard to get an economical balance, or I don't know how to say that well, but I don't know, it's just like I have this type of question is like this kind of project could be embedded on this way.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why we partnered with the United Nations Development Program was precisely to try to do that. We're kind of aware that we have a kind of tool set that in a way has developed from academic research and some previous applications, but we also felt that there was a lot of scope for it. But at the same time, as you know, there is always a kind of a gap between a certain type of research world and the actual reality on the ground, if you want to call it like that. And so we tried to we actually entered this process. So, for instance, UNDP, they have local offices in different countries, and one is in Guatemala as well. And they are trying to provide this kind of link between the sort of research we are doing and the development of dedicated studies or pilots in the cities, involving local government as well as community groups. It's a process. It's a long process. It doesn't happen overnight because of the difficulties to enter into local, let's say, politics or local processes. But
Okay.
but this is definitely something that we these specific projects is really about that. It's about trying to create a tool set that has the ability to it can be transferred to many different scenarios and essentially benefit them in the specificities of their condition. And essentially Guatemala is one of these examples. It would be great to find ways to accelerate this process. So maybe even people like you that have this curiosity and this interest in kind of bridging the gap, could be the way to go. I mean, so far we have worked through this channel of UNDP. I'm sure that's not the only one. There could be other channels, yeah. So obviously,
Sure.
If you are interested in becoming one of these channels, there is always an opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I'm really interested about that because I'm working also with other people who are trying to tracking the CO2 or particle matter, tracking all this stuff, and probably I don't know if I could be helpful for that. It would be a really honor. And also, I really want to share another book for if it could be a really another source for you. It's about ravines. It's a big atlas of ravines. A friend of mine do that. So basically, did that. Sorry, I shared the link, and you can basically there is a big source of information about the ravines here in Guatemala. And once again, I really love your work, and it's a pretty honor to be here. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And we talk again. Yeah.
Just one question: how I can, if I send you an email or some stuff like that?
Yes, you can write as my email. There is one of UCL or Innsbruck, or you can write at the projects at Ecologic Studio. Let me write.
Nice. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Also, I gave you also Marco email. Cool.
Okay.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Are there other questions?
Or even just comments and so on. I mean, like you can just feel free to come up.
Is it all clear for the 6 students that are working with us, what to do for tomorrow, how to evolve the work?
Yeah, in terms of that, for tomorrow, is it just sort of progress from the comments you gave per individual?
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, essentially it will be good to see an evolution of the GAN if there is enough time to run the algorithm, and also to strengthen the biological reference and this relationship to the site, at least in terms of research, or the image reference in case it's not biological and is a relationship. Then tomorrow we can have a longer discussion. So if there are more information both about the project and the biological reference, and if the GAN experiment is more concluded, then we can discuss in more detail what to submit and what to prepare for the final presentation on Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah, don't forget, like when you finish running your first simulation, like I was saying before, also to capture some of the epochs and kind of maybe create a kind of composed image, like a catalog with some of them, so that we can kind of see this progression. And maybe while you do it, if you kind of highlight instances that are particularly interesting to you and why do you think they're interesting, because obviously on one side it is really cool that the simulation goes on its own, and like we can basically go to the park and that's fantastic. But at the same time, if we just look at the final image that comes out, we may end up missing that image is actually the product of a pretty complex process. And I think part of the magic of GAN is really in the process, right? Is in what's going on, and this is a kind of a let's say continuous cycle between generating images and the discriminator trying to figure out whether that's real or fake, and the generator so there is this kind of internal race in the algorithm. And I think that's somehow what eventually produces the kind of magic, or this a kind of a what makes it generative in a good way. And I think that's we should take advantage of the of this process and explore it, as well as the final image. So yeah, take a little bit of time to do that and to assemble a set of images so that we can then comment them all together.
Cool.
Thank you for now. See you tomorrow.
Thank you very much. I've really
Thank you
enjoyed
all.
the tutorial.
Tomorrow, 10 a.m.
Thank you.
Cheers.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye everyone.